In this interview, I talk with Paul Vecsei, who's doing some amazing research on fish and meticulous science illustrations of fish. You can see some of his pictures on his Instagram. He also does underwater photography of fish, and in this interview, we talk about how he got started, how nature journalists at home can apply some of these skills, and his philosophy on working hard and getting better. Don't miss the lightning round. All right, Paul, I am really excited to be talking to you today. I've been following your work on Instagram, and just to give people a feeling of the type of fish illustration that you're doing, can you show us some work that you've been working on recently?
Yes, sir. So this is the recently finished coho salmon. It's on my Instagram site and my Facebook site. So people who are familiar with what I do know that it's basically I try for very realistic scientific illustration. It's not hyper realism. That's something very different. And
Okay.
I'm not imitating. For example, some people take pictures, a photo of an angler who he just landed a coho salmon and it's in the net and out slightly out of the water, so you get that glistening shine from the mucus, the wetness. There are many rules in scientific illustration which prevent it from being an imitation of a photo, per se. And there's certain things that have to be displayed in a certain way. So what I'm doing is trying to take that to the maximum. This is a cutthroat trout. The other one I showed you was a spawning male coho. So this is cutthroat in the U.S. that I recently did. So it gives you an idea. And then also, this is interesting, a pink salmon male.
Wow.
You can see really what I'm interested in is, above all, the morphology. So there's a way to display that. The meristics are also the other thing. Meristics are anything countable, numerical traits. So the number of fin rays, number of scales on the lateral line. So those things have to be shown in a certain way, and therefore you can actually improve on reality. So the idea is I'm supposed to make something more clear, better than a photo. The trick is, can I also make it look real and give you a sense of volume? And yes, but that's not critical. So some very good scientific illustration may not look incredibly real or photo-like, but it speaks the language of science. That's what matters.
Got it. Wow, that is super cool, and I definitely am going to have some more questions about fish illustration and what are the important things to show. But first I wanted to get a little bit of an idea of how you got into this. Like when I was a kid, we had these illustrated encyclopedias, and the fishes page was just, you could look at that encyclopedia and the fishes page was just totally torn up, because as a kid I would just stare at those pages. And then when I went to school, I still loved fish, and I just remember in school people talking about like marine biology, but no one ever talked about like freshwater biology, and personally, like, that's what I was super interested in. And then I sort of, I ended up developing a bit of a math phobia and didn't follow through with life sciences or anything like that. Could you tell a little bit about how you got into like why fish, and how you got into work as a fisheries biologist, and then how that and the art, how they went side by side, or how that developed?
Yep. So as a kid, like most of us, I had a real dinosaur thing going for a while. And dinosaurs were great, but the problem was it was very much like sort of studying the ghosts of the past. And unlike today, with all this very good computer animation that brings it back to life, it was pretty stale stuff. There were some paintings in a few books that were good, and that was about it. And this is before that new golden age revival of dinosaur research and way they present it to the public. So that, unfortunately, I couldn't see any way of interacting with that. And then at the age of 10, 11, I started fishing. And it was really neat because fish were sort of creature-like monsters also, but I could catch them, photograph them, we could eat them and make a big festive thing in the evening of that. And plus, there were a bunch of my friends my age who were also equally into it. And then one day when we weren't going to the summer camps where the fishing was going on, this was right near the Vermont border in Quebec, someone took us to the St. Lawrence River. And this was so weird compared to a stream. Here you had waves breaking on the shore like the ocean. This is a massive water body. And I'll never forget when we got down to the shore, there was a Vietnamese guy gutting a carp. And it was so big that it was like a pig, a big animal that was being washed the insides after he'd gutted it. And I couldn't believe that near Montreal, minutes drive, this is what you get. And so suddenly they were like dinosaur size in the fish world, though.
Mm-hmm.
And all of us became obsessed with carp. And that was the start of the carp phase, which lasted for years and years. And also we're European, Hungarian background in my case, and all my friends were also first generation immigrants. So carp was as cool as cutthroat trout or golden trout is for you, believe me.
Mm-hmm.
And then the drawing, well, I always drew dinosaurs, and also what's interesting, and this is important, the drawing of the fish has a very, you can call it an engineering side to it. I was interested at the same time with World War II airplanes, and especially the lineage. So the evolution of the Spitfire from the early Mark I that had just the normal size engine, Rolls-Royce Merlin, and then when it switched to the Rolls-Royce Packard, the Griffin. So by having the Griffin engine, the nose extended, more propellers. So, and of course, at the same time, the camouflage pattern changed. So I would always draw side views of airplanes, but showing that very technical side view, showing two things: the shape, okay, and remember this in the fish later, and color, and the variation. Now imagine that, what I just told you, and me getting into brown trout and realizing that there are brown trout, not like North America, which are nothing but stocked origin, and these aren't pure strain or anything that interesting. But there are brown trout all over the world, in Morocco, in the high altitude lakes in the mountains of Morocco, imagine, or Afghanistan, or Turkey, the greatest diversity. So from stream to stream in Turkey, depending on if it's flowing into the Black Sea or the Mediterranean, these browns have evolved to be so different. And I started drawing these in color where the pattern is different, the shape is different. They are brown trout, but the diversity is incredible. And doing these side views that no one's ever drawn, it showing this huge range, I thought it was the coolest thing. So I was really hooked. And, you know, I've done a lot of black stitching ink type drawings for journals, for science journals. Initially, that's what I was doing. But then I realized that the color, as long as you can keep the realism going with it, the color, of course, speaks a whole different language. That's what you really have to convey. Just like the camouflage colors so appeal to me, the fish have that, and then
Wow, that is such a cool analogy. And like I definitely went through a stage as a kid where all I wanted to draw, even though I was spending a lot of time in nature and looking at animals in nature, I didn't get that clear crossover with my art. And I was usually drawing like robots and stuff from video games that I thought would be cool. And it wasn't until a little bit later in adult life where I realized that I can combine my love of art and love of nature. So that's really neat, that the way that you have noticed in yourself that the parallel between the drawing the planes and the drawing the fish. That's super cool. So it sounds like art and science kind of evolved at the same time for you. Is that true?
yeah. And then, well, so I was already immersed in the field of ichthyology, fish study, fish biology, fisheries type work,
Hmm.
when all this really took off. So the illustrations, like what I showed you, it was basically since 2006 that I started doing in color, that type of drawing.
Hmm.
So relatively recent in the
Hmm.
grand scheme of things. But before that, I had a long history of the black and white. And,
Okay, got it.
that's good background to have for people to
Hmm.
just be using either graphite or just like a rapidograph and
Hmm.
see what you can do. That's a whole, it works very different in the brain when you're challenged in that way.
Absolutely. Yeah, I feel like color can be distracting a lot of times, especially when people are just getting started. Okay, that is super cool. So I guess one thing, since you have so much experience combining art and science, I think you make a case for why that makes sense. But I think a lot of people still don't understand that. Like I went to UC Santa Cruz and they used to have a science illustration program there, but
I know.
due to, like funding and stuff like that, it all these other science arenas were so much more attractive, or seemed so much more applicable. So could you explain like a little bit more about, you described some of why science illustration is important for showing fish, but in this age of digital photography and all of these like high tech things, how come, like what is science illustration still providing?
Yeah. So really, the best way to think of it is scientific illustration gives a almost like a breath of clarity to something that is there. So of course you can take a photo, but the photo, it treats all things equal. So the photo, being what it is, it can't speak to you and say, but look at this in particular, or really, this is what you should be looking at
Mm.
more, as opposed to a similar subspecies that has such and such feature. Uh, with scientific illustration, you have a bit of leeway to manipulate what you're telling your viewer.
Hmm.
It's subtle, it's very subtle, and that's the point, that you can't make it deviate too far from, let's say, a photo or the reality.
Hmm.
But it is a play on that.
Mm.
So, scientific illustrators know that. And of course, now with what you can do online, you can do a very good, clear layout, which again helps bring the message home, as opposed to a photo with a muddled background or influenced by the reflections in the sky or objects around. Uh, that being said, there are some really good stuff being done, even in fish photography, where they take photos, they're able to blacken the background,
Hmm.
do all kinds of things. So there are good ways to present photographs done. They have what they call a photarium. So the fish is underwater, fins are open, and if they get the right color background and then they can work it after in Photoshop, there are good ways to look at fish images.
Hmm.
But still, I would say the scientific illustration at the moment has the edge, and it's just the way our brains work. You know, it's something that evolved to speak as clearly as possible on the appearance of something,
Mm.
and photos are plagued by their honesty. You know, that's the problem. So I think I'll be in business a while.
That's cool. I love the idea that photos are plagued by their honesty. That's a great quote. And I feel like it's easier to believe you. I mean, I want to believe that, that illustration, like you're preaching to the choir in some ways, but I think it gives you more credibility because you are a photographer. So you do a lot of amazing fish photography as well, right?
Yeah. So I do underwater photography is my thing, which I like to do.
Hmm.
If I had a choice to do almost anything, that's what I would be really doing with most of my time. And I do a lot of fish photography for my illustrations. So remember, the source material is everything. These aren't just
Mm,
thought up. I have to have, so we have like we build a cradle with mesh so that the
mm,
fish, for example, sinks in properly. So you get a very flat perspective. So the mid body sinks in more than the head and the tail. So then you get a very flat perspective from where
mm,
you're viewing. And then you have to take it from very far away, like 6 or 8 feet, and then zoom in so that the fish fills the frame. So that in itself is a whole, there's an
mm,
art to that photography. You know what I mean? It's very demanding. And then when I have the right photos and the close-ups and everything, I have enough material to generate a scientific illustration. So,
mm,
so it's kind of a weird thing that I have to take this, and actually, the photos that I use, as good as they are, you'd be surprised when you actually look close how much more detail the drawing would have than
mm.
even the photo.
Wow.
So,
Wow, wow. Yeah, that's super cool. Let's start moving towards how this can apply to lay people, because I think before we hit the record, we were talking a little bit about this, and it feels like birds and mammals, like if you look at photography contests or you look at the subjects for a lot of people's nature journaling, it seems like birds and mammals really get a lot of attention. Um, for people who are interested in kind of learning more about fish or trying to incorporate fish more into their nature journaling, or even just understanding like why they should care about fish, like how would you sell fish as like an important subject to people, or how would you explain like to people who haven't nature journaled fish at all, like how they should start thinking about it, or why they should care?
well, good question. And I always wondered. So, for example, I noticed that when it comes to type of illustrations that I do, botanical art or scientific botanical illustration has a huge following worldwide.
Mm-hmm.
And then in birds, also very much so. And fish, is as much as there is interest in fish, it doesn't translate over to illustration of fish as much as these other things do. Um, and good for me is all I can say, because I can't believe like what some of these uh, young students draw. You look on Instagram in the world of flowers, for example, or plants. Some of the South Koreans or the British. I mean, every retired British housewife, it seems, is a fantastic illustrator of flowers. It's incredible. It's frightening. So, and true talent in a technical sense too, eh? Not just, I kind of get by willpower, effort, and time. Some of these people are masters of the technique as well. So, in our society, it's just, I guess, a matter of what people find a combination of beautiful, interesting, appealing, or worth showing. And fish has its rank. I mean, it's still very popular. Anglers, for example. I mean, if you look at the army of fishermen, that doesn't necessarily mean there's going to be so much in fish drawing done in my style. There are a lot of paintings of anglers. There are paintings or illustrations of fish, as you know,
Mm-hmm.
in books. But these kinds of renderings that I do, we're a handful. There's like 4 or 5 people that I know of in like, I'm including Europe even,
Mm-hmm.
North America and Australia that do what I do.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah, yeah. So do you think people should, I noticed a quote. Let's go from this quote here. In a video, I found a video about you online, and in it you said that your goal is to describe the fish, and that other people can do the conservation work, and that your main goal is to create these accurate descriptions of the biodiversity and the morphology and all of that, and
yeah.
that the conservation is up to other people. Could you explain that a little bit, and like where you see your role in terms of like the general public and the
Yeah.
importance of fish in the
Yeah.
ecosystem?
Yeah. So now keep in mind, I am a PhD fisheries biologist, but never mind that for a moment. What
Hmm.
I'm interested in with these drawings is to display the tremendous biodiversity that we have in the fish world. Now, it's sometimes blatantly obvious when you're looking at differences between species. But
Hmm.
like I told you in the brown trout example, and there are many in the, for example, in the char, it's similar too. Uh, the idea is to show that, for example, geographically, a so-called species can vary tremendously throughout its range.
Hmm.
Okay, so in a spatial sense. But then also, I did recently several expeditions to Great Bear Lake, and there you had a, a, a lake trout ancestor that recolonized the system after the ice age.
Hmm.
So you think, okay, so there's of course lake trout and Great Bear, and not much else in terms of big predatory fish. Well, you wouldn't believe what happened in this case with the lake trout. It it radiated
Hmm.
into these multiple forms, just like the Darwin's finches,
Hmm.
where you had all these niche openings.
Hmm.
The lake trout became adapted to different habitats, and because of their different food sources, their morphology adapted accordingly.
Hmm.
So you have completely different looking so-called lake trout, all the
Hmm.
same species that in sort of 7, 8,000 years
Hmm.
became very different looking. And to
Yeah.
me, that's the kind of thing I'm interested in illustrating. Now,
Hmm.
I'm I'm not a taxonomist, so I'll
Hmm.
leave that to them
Hmm.
to describe or rename or give subspecies rank or species rank or call it a morph or an ecotype, whatever. I'm interested in that, but that's not my role here. Does that answer your
Got
question?
it. Got it. And I think maybe in your quote you were and in that video it did a really great job of showing what you're talking about in terms of the diversity even within like a so-called single species.
Yeah.
That was really, they did a really good job editing together your images.
Yeah.
And so I guess what I should have realized is that, and you pointed this out, is that you are doing two things. So do you see those as having separate goals? Like, are you just describing more with your art, and then in your fisheries biologist role you're involved more in conservation and education for the public or something?
Yeah, and it depends. You go with the time. So at one point we had funding to do actual research where I was, even though I was in consulting. So with Fisheries and Oceans Canada, we were working on Cisco. They look like small whitefish. So we
Mhm.
were doing exactly what I described. We were the first to come across these new forms of Cisco in Great Slave Lake here, and we described it, published it in a journal, and also did a field guide on this diversity.
Mhm.
So there is that, but then on a day-to-day stuff, it could be as banal as monitoring uh, fish stocks, but you're doing a lot of snorkel surveys. So again,
Mhm.
that's what I'm into. I'm good at identifying fish. I like being in the fish world and
Mhm.
photo documenting it all. And then of course there's outreach, I would call it, where
Mhm.
we deal with the public, whether it's school children or people like you, where we try to convey the interesting aspect of the fish world, or why there's an issue suddenly that you deserve to know about or
Mhm.
should care about. And again, that's where I have to do a good job.
Mhm. Got it. Yeah. So what would you say is, why are fish important?
Well, fish are important because they're a huge part of the biota of the world. The fish fauna is present in every part of the world,
Mhm.
almost like nothing else in terms of their adaptability. And
Mhm.
in my case, being a fisheries biologist now, fish stocks and their use by people uh, is very important because it's what sustains us
Mhm.
to some degree.
Mhm.
So, fish are interesting for the sake of, being fish,
Mhm.
and, fish biologists, fisheries fish biologists who study fish behavior can find the fish to be interesting or important for one reason or another, and tell you something completely different that I would have to say. But in my current role as a fisheries biologist, it's, let's say, the management of natural resources. That's the primary goal right now of what I would need to do. So assess a fish stock, know what you have in terms of the diversity or uniqueness, and then also you have to deal with what level of exploitation that fish stock can handle. But uh, I there are many aspects about ichthyology or fish biology
Hmm.
that interest me, but
Got it.
that's what I have to worry about right now.
Got it. Okay, yeah, that totally makes sense. So, I have some questions. I want to show you some of my nature journal pages where I've tried to nature journal fish. Unfortunately, I don't have my. I just did a 21-day rafting trip down the Grand Canyon, which was really cool, and we saw humpback chub, and I got a nature journal them at night. And then my friend had a GoPro that he put into the water, and so we got some footage. But I don't have those pages with me, unfortunately. And when I've tried to nature journal fish, a lot of times it's been a little bit more indirect. So I went on a fishing trip, and on this trip, I was hoping to catch some and be able to try to sketch them, like in a net or something. But I ended up just kind of having to nature journal like the sort of more like the context,
Yeah,
and even including like my fishing supplies. I also try to, show like the different lures and stuff I tried. Here's
yeah,
I saw some bluegill down here, so I just did this quick sketch of what I could see looking through the water and a bit of a map.
yeah,
So this is sort of like my attempt to try to nature journal fish, and combine fishing and nature journaling. What are some things, for people who want to incorporate fish as a subject, or even just think of fisheries? What are some of the things people can be looking for, even if it's not like, we might not have the expectation that someone's going to be able to catch this fish, set it up in a perfect place to take great photos of it, and then make their own like illustrations from it. What are some, like metrics or ecological things that people should be looking at if they want to incorporate, because a lot of people will go to a lake and they're nature journaling, the Canada geese and whatever, and doing like a landscape painting,
yeah,
showing the lake. What are some of the things they can be thinking about as far as
yeah,
fish go?
yeah. So good point. And you know what? At one point, what I was doing with little fish, instead of trying to do underwater photography, because with a wide angle lens, they look too small, too far away. For a while, what I was doing is I brought with me a cheap, simple aquarium to the creek with a tiny little dip net, scooped up the fish, put them in the aquarium, and they're fine for 20 minutes. In that case, the issue was the water warming up, and at a certain point, I would either change the water or let them go. But at
Mm-hmm.
least then, if a person's sitting on shore, relatively comfortable, you can set up somewhere along the stream bank. Uh, a lot of these areas actually are somewhat urbanized. It's not such a deep wilderness type expedition to get to. Right in town, we have streams like that, and then you can actually concentrate on the fish, and you get a real good view while staying in your world. You're viewing the fish in its world. So
Mm-hmm.
for doing what you describe, I can't see anything uh, better than that. That's what
Mm-hmm.
I strongly recommend. And
Mm-hmm.
on bigger fish, well, it's sort of a case of where you have a fisherman might have caught something, and while he's still fishing, it's on a stringer. He has it in the water in the shallows, or
Mm-hmm.
they have a few dead fish on shore. Uh, you can at least look at it for a while, do a quick sketch, learn a lot from what you're seeing. There's so many ways to do this. I like what I like doing, for example, is underwater photography, and I would suggest people like with a GoPro, you can frankly get some good image quality, and then you review that at home. You can look at that and also touch up, fix up your drawings, because then you have again a kind of sneak sneak peek cheating reference of
Mm-hmm.
you're in their world with them for a
Mm-hmm.
matter of seconds, and you're seeing them at all these different angles, and you see how their fins look wide open, erect, and not just closed and dead.
Mm-hmm.
So there's all these ways where you could really tweak your drawings,
Mm-hmm.
even if they're done pretty quick on the spot, to look pretty good.
Yeah. That's really cool. So, you've mentioned fin erectness several times. Like, could you mention for, I feel like there's certain things like, that if people don't have experience, like we all are experts at looking at human faces, for example, just biologically, innately. And I feel like some of the other things, like people have looked at cats a lot, but, people don't necessarily pay attention when they look at fish that much. So what are some of the like, if you could just give like 3 to 5 things like that people really need to pay attention to? You've mentioned, the morphometrics and stuff like that, but just for people getting started, what are some things so that they don't just totally blow it when they're looking at or trying to draw a fish?
Very important question. So, for example, the fins, I can't believe how many talented, skilled artists don't actually display the fins properly. Or people who aren't fish people per se, but very good artists or illustrators, I can often tell uh, when they're drawing a fish, they don't know how the fin would look or should be presented.
Mm-hmm.
So just to give you an idea, imagine on fish that we photograph, we have to pin the fins open. Now, you
Mm-hmm.
don't need to exaggerate and show it extremely erect to the
Mm-hmm.
point where a fish can't even normally do that underwater. But nonetheless, the fins have to be erect, open,
Mm-hmm.
so that you can count, for example, the fin rays,
Mm-hmm.
and so that you see the membrane attachment between the fin rays,
Mm-hmm.
and what is really important, any pigmentation
Mm-hmm.
on the membrane of those fin rays.
Mm-hmm.
This is all second nature to me, but
Mm-hmm.
I'm surprised on how people don't get it.
Mm-hmm.
So these are why, of course, the photos are so demanding in order to be usable for me. You know,
Mm-hmm.
so that's one thing, and then also it's how you emphasize. So you know how brown trout, let's say males or salmon, they develop a kite. In the
Mm-hmm.
case of the browns, they have the bottom jaw. In the
Mm-hmm.
case of salmon, it's actually the top jaw.
Mm-hmm.
So if the mouth is closed, you can't show that as much. And if you have the mouth open a little,
Mm-hmm.
well, then the viewer has a better sense of, oh, yeah, that bottom jaw goes way out, curves up suddenly. On an Atlantic salmon, if the mouth is closed, well, that kite, that curvature, it locks into an actual opening on the top where it's then not seen. Um,
Mm-hmm.
it fits, it's recessed in. So if you have the mouth open, well, you're displaying all these things in their most exaggerated but natural state.
Mm-hmm.
So there are ways, and a lot of this is obvious,
Mm-hmm.
maybe even to you or obvious to me, but people who aren't necessarily fish people need to be aware of this. That's all I
Got
want to
it.
say.
Got it. Okay. So those are the fins and how the fins are displayed, and then the mouths, especially on some of these salmonids, is important to
Yeah,
show for
yeah.
descriptive purposes. Okay, cool. Well, that's really awesome.
Here, just on that note,
Yeah.
I'll show you again. So the pink salmon could be drawn with the mouth closed,
Mm-hmm.
but it wouldn't. Think of what a different creature it would appear to be
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to looking at it like this.
Yeah.
And you can say the same thing about, you know, something like a male coho salmon. Now look how this is borderline, but it's
Mm-hmm.
still, you get a sense of how the top jaw
Mm-hmm.
develops this bizarre hook-like snout, and the bottom jaw is much shorter.
Mm-hmm.
So these are things that you've got to. I mean, it would be almost a shame if you have a fish that interesting, but you're you're subduing that
Mm-hmm.
extreme morphology, that you're not emphasizing it to the degree that it can be.
Got it. Got it. Yeah, it seems like some of that stuff people will just have to get from looking at fish a lot, and noticing the differences and learning like what are the important characteristics, what are those, like, because you'll probably notice something, a small color variation on a fish,
Yeah,
and zoom in on that, and then another person might not even be
exactly.
aware of that. Okay.
So, for example, the sexual dimorphism,
Mm-hmm.
color and shape. So,
Mm-hmm.
in the salmon, it is primarily the head,
Mm-hmm.
the males versus females, but also the body. So, the males can have a huge hump, for example, like the pink
Mm-hmm.
salmon. And then color. The males usually have, in the fish world, more brilliance in their colors, the
Mm-hmm.
vibrance. So, these are things that the scientific illustration is very good at showing in comparisons. To
Mm-hmm.
have a photo, how often are you going to get a male and female on the same day, lined up next to each other, photographed in the same lighting condition?
Mm-hmm.
Not easy to do. But in the scientific illustration, I can have a beautiful display of a male next to a female, both in their spawning colors and spawning morphology. Well,
Mm-hmm.
beat that.
Yeah,
That
yeah,
that's
definitely.
that's where this stuff excels.
Cool, cool. All right, that is really awesome. And just another practical question right now in terms of how to apply some of this stuff to nature journaling. I am going to be going kayaking after this interview, and probably take some fishing gear with me to a little reservoir over here. And there's some largemouth bass and there's bluegill, for sure in there. I don't know what else, but I want a nature journal for my kayak. And like if I were to, try to pay attention to fish more on this trip and not just like look for birds and pretty scenes, like what are some things that you would recommend, like maybe environmentally, like if I don't catch any fish, for example, I'm going to try your dip net with a little thing. But like what are some things ecologically around fish, that I could be paying attention to, or maybe weather or whatever? What are some things that I could do
Yeah.
to help nature journal that?
So, I can't imagine someone who nature journals and likes fish wouldn't bring, for example, a snorkel mask.
Mm-hmm.
You stop at various parts along shore, people wouldn't
Mm-hmm.
believe, and I'm telling you, I do
Mm-hmm.
this a lot.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of the things I do as a fish biologist. I'm underwater with the fish, and most of the action, mark my words, happens in ankle deep to knee deep water. And deep for me and my world is waist deep, and
Mm-hmm.
chest deep is almost forget it.
Mm-hmm.
So there's so much going on in the shallows,
Mm-hmm.
and you can get so close to a lot of these that just by observing for little bursts of a minute, half a minute, as you're going through your watershed from the upper parts of your
Mm-hmm.
stream all the way down to the bigger river, you'll get a real sense of the fish stuff that way.
Okay, so I need to get a snorkel mask, basically.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And imagine along with that, you can also do bits of GoPro footage, for
Mm-hmm.
example.
Mm-hmm.
Then the other thing I do is I have now what I described. It's sort of how the aquarium thing I told you evolved into. There are companies that make now what they call a photarium. So
Mm-hmm.
imagine a very flat aquarium,
Mm-hmm.
easy to pack in your backpack. They have them this big for little minnows, but
Mm-hmm.
this wide. So you
Mm-hmm.
fill it with water, you dip net a minnow, very easy to do near shore,
Mm-hmm.
put him in, and you can take a photo or just watch him for a while,
Mm-hmm.
and then you've recorded him forever if you take a snapshot or two for yourself, and you can be finishing your journaling at home doing touch ups and whatever, So, and they make photariums in, trout size now.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of people who are catch and release anglers, they do very nice photos of their catch
Mm.
in that manner.
Cool.
The science people use it a lot, though. By
Yeah.
so, there's ways, in other words, that you can get more out of your trip than
Mm-hmm.
just hoping that Joe Blow next to you
Uh-huh.
catches a bluegill on his rod, and
Uh-huh.
then you tell him, "Hold that for a second, hold that," and then you
Uh-huh.
try drawing. There's ways to prolong the moments
Mm-hmm.
so that you have time to draw, and
Mm-hmm.
also for you to familiarize yourself with the looks, the appearance of those creatures.
Okay. Wow. That's super. I'm getting super excited. I wish I had a snorkel mask right now. I do have a wetsuit, and that should be fine for our temperatures around here. I saw some of your pictures from some of your snorkel surveys and some pretty rapidy systems, and that looks pretty exciting. Well, I think it's time for the lightning round. Are you ready for the lightning round?
Yep.
Is coffee an essential art supply? Yes or no?
Yes.
Okay. Does your family love fish as much as you?
No.
Do you keep a very tidy studio?
No, 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 no.
Okay. Have you considered making a book with your art?
Yes, I have.
Do you ever eat your subjects?
All the time. It's why I do it.
Do other ichthyologists understand what you do?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So this is the last yes or no question. Some scientists have developed a time machine, and they're planning on sending some researchers back in time to study freshwater ecosystems. However, there's the technology is a little bit problematic, and there's a 10% chance that if they send you back, they might not be able to bring you back to the present. Would you go on this research trip?
Yes.
Okay, so what period in time would you go back to, and what ecosystem or what fish would you want to? What prehistoric fish would you want to study?
You know, this I can use a few words. It's not a lightning round question anymore.
Yeah, go ahead.
Let's say Jurassic,
Mhm.
any sort of where fish complexity is already reached a certain level, and you're starting to recognize stuff of today in their original early form. So I was
Yeah.
always interested in sturgeon. Well, sturgeon
Mm.
date back, let's say, to the late Cretaceous. So that whole dinosaur period, in other words, is what I'm getting at. But the underwater world in freshwater during the dinosaurs.
Awesome, awesome. And on that note, are you familiar with Ray Troll,
Yeah, of
the
course.
illustrator? He has this book. I don't know. Is this true that there was salmon with these like saber-toothed salmon like this?
Yes. Yeah, I have drawn that as well. That
Wow.
actual fish, the
Wow.
saber-toothed salmon. Yeah.
That is so cool. Okay, so continuing with that question, what five art supplies would you, if you could only take five art supplies on that trip to the Jurassic, what would you take with you?
I use, as you know, color pencil. I guess we should have emphasized that in the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
I also it's mixed media to a degree, so I use a watercolor base, which in my case, but it doesn't have to be. It's the Caran d'Ache made in Switzerland.
Mm-hmm.
This brand here, this is
Mm-hmm.
the highest quality watercolor pencil.
Mm.
So I often apply an initial base layer very lightly uh, of the whole illustration. Then I use either oil-based and wax-based. You might have a very technical podcast one day to your viewers about these things, so I won't go
Mm-hmm.
too into it.
Okay.
But the color pencils are oil-based or wax-based, and there are some very good ones, and they're all quite different. So my favorite is the Dual is Faber-Castell. This
Mm-hmm.
one is German make,
Mm-hmm.
and these are good because their colors are rich, but they also hold a point very well.
Mm.
So it's really always a battle of how good they are for coloring, like crayons,
Mm-hmm.
or how good are they for sharp detail. And
Right.
you know, maybe the best of those is the Caran d'Ache Pablo,
Mm-hmm.
which is this pink one here. So
Mm-hmm.
this is made in Switzerland also. Very good
Mm-hmm.
quality. And the go-to general one, which all kids even use, is the Prismacolor.
Mm-hmm.
Now, for some reason, Prismacolor has the biggest following on the planet.
Right.
And that's all fine. And it's really buttery and nice to use, but it can't hold a real point for very
Hmm.
long because
Hmm.
it's so smooth and buttery. But on the other hand, the vibrance is unmatched almost by anything else.
Hmm.
And they have an enormous range of colors. So if
Yeah.
people need to get a color as they see it, Prismacolor is your go-to. But
Hmm.
keep in mind, what I do is I'm building layers and layers,
Yeah.
and I'm building up the color. So I
Hmm.
never actually draw something on a fish where it looks like olive brown or khaki brown, and I take a pencil that is called khaki or olive brown. I
Yeah.
actually create the color by using 3 or 4 or 8 different colors
Hmm.
layered and layered for days. And
Yeah.
then I use a blender, a colorless blender,
Hmm.
and press that into the grain of the paper. And then it pops and it looks like
Mm.
I want it to look like.
Got it.
But these are technique and technical things that, this is high level stuff. And we don't
Hmm.
need to get into this now. But
Yeah, I know. I wish we could get into that a whole lot more. So, which five, if you could take five, say, like you could take a maybe one of your items could be like a packet
yeah, yeah. Sorry, I didn't finish that. So yes, so
yeah,
the
no
bottom line
worries.
is color pencils are critical,
Okay.
and that counts as one. Then a good eraser,
Okay.
uh, and now this what a waste of a choice you might say, but to me the most obvious, a very good sharpener, pencil
Okay.
sharpener. It's
Hmm.
all I'm doing. Most of my life, I spend actually sharpening pencils. Believe it or
Hmm.
not, that's everything. So and then the paper, of course, is one. You use these nice what are they called? Booklets and with
Yeah.
that I'm not at ease with that, so I
Hmm.
use hardboard illustration board. So I would bring
Okay.
a pack of those. I use cold press, by the way.
Okay. So
Um,
that would, I think we're at, is that four? Colored pencil packet, the sharpener, the eraser, the
okay,
illustration board.
and then what a fifth? A what? Yeah, I mean, it doesn't hurt to have a measuring tool, a ruler, or
Great.
calipers.
Okay.
Uh, a guy like you on shore with the fish, and if you want to draw it rather exact,
Hmm.
nothing beats having the calipers that you can open up, like all
Yeah.
kids' school packs when they have the geometry set, they've
Yeah.
got it
Yeah.
there. So
Okay, cool. Well, that's awesome. That sounds like an exciting trip back to the Jurassic. And then, and then this is another sort of short question, but which do you think is more important, curiosity or experience?
uh, wow, that's a good question, and they go in tandem.
Hmm.
Hopefully, you have both. Curiosity then leads you to want to do what I do,
Hmm.
which then you build experience as long as you do it nonstop, like I do.
Hmm.
So a certain amount of willpower is required, therefore, to stick with it. And I wasn't a very technical person. I wasn't an artist. It's my background. So for me to get to this level, it's really you just the persistence of doing it nonstop is
Got
what
it.
got me where I am.
Okay. And then, so the last two, or last question for the lightning round is, what is if there was a holy grail for you in your work, what would it be? Like, whether that be researching a particular, waterway or a particular species, what would the holy grail for your work be?
Expedition.
Expedition
Yeah.
to where? Any particular place or species or
You
that
know,
you would love to?
So, for example, any of these, I like giant freshwater systems. So, going to
Hmm.
Great Bear Lake, it's like it's like going back hundreds of years to where the British explorers were first coming across waterways in the continent, discovering all these fish, and giving them names. That's
Hmm.
still alive and well where I live in the remote subarctic of Canada,
Hmm.
luckily. So it's still like that final frontier of ichthyology, which was in the 1800s. We're kind of there now
Yeah.
where I am. So
Well.
any expedition from my house,
Mhm.
some uh, and I'm pretty excited because I know I'm going to come across new and interesting stuff, and stuff that not only you haven't ever seen, but
Mhm.
maybe the eyes of science never seen either.
Wow, that's really cool. It's a good sign if your holy grail or your dream project is something that's actually that you're already doing. So I think that's a really good sign. Well, that was a really fun lightning round, and I think um, I just have a last couple of questions here for this conversation. And you've mentioned persistent several times, and I definitely noticed some interesting quotes in the video, and also on your I think it's on the Fine Art America site in your bio. But I wanted to ask you a little bit more, and this I think will maybe be motivational for other people. But you said on your in your Fine Art America site that there is no pleasure in the creation process of such art because of how long it takes. Once finished, however, the sensation is euphoric. Um, and so, could you explain that a little bit more about like what you value in the process and how to motivate? Because if I were a beginner in this field, and I heard someone say that there's no pleasure in the process. I don't know how, but at the same time, you're saying that process and sticking to that is really what got you to where you are today. Could
Yeah,
you just talk about that a little bit?
yeah. And believe it or not, that's actually understated. So this is a good question. Journaling is great because it's such an immediate reward. You're interacting with that world, and in a short matter of time, you get the reward of having recreated in a storytelling way, like you do, what you've gone through. So that it's hard to lose interest even in the process of something like that. What I do is so lengthy, so tedious, it's so technical that it goes from hours into days and the days into weeks. And you don't really see that much progress, or you hate the way it looks. And then on the last 2 days out of 20 days, it all starts to come together. And that, you don't know how many times I'm on the verge of giving up on a drawing. I hate it, but I keep at it. And then the magic starts to always happen on the 1 minute to midnight kind of effect.
Mm.
And you just have to keep at it, and it all eventually comes together. But there's so many layers I'm building up, so many details that I'm drawing in, and finally they all meet in this beautiful way, and you have what I showed you. Well, that it's rewarding, almost a relief more than anything, and it's a high for sure because it was all worth it. All that effort for so long came to something, you know. Now, it's not. I'm not always pleasantly surprised. Sometimes it's just finished, but often, it's almost drug addiction like, so that I keep having to do this, do this, do this. But what's the high? Well, the drug addiction is the scientific illustration, but the
Mhm.
high is few and far between, and it's the moments of the culmination, the 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 finishing of that effort.
Mm. Wow, that's really cool. Um, that is super interesting. So, just last question here for people who are nature journaling at home, and maybe don't have access to such amazing spots as you do, or are trying to also just kind of build their skills in this way. Some of the like that precise work sounds kind of intimidating, but what kind of just words of motivation would you give for people who are just getting started, who want to draw fish more, want to learn more about fish? Any kind of just basic tips or motivation for people?
Well, if you're like me, I pity you, and those of you who know who you are, if you're into this kind of drawing, but then you have to do it, and good luck. But really, it doesn't have to be so stringent.
Mhm.
There's a it depends what you want to get out of it, and art is a great human thing we have,
Mhm.
and it's a ultimate means of expression. That's
Mhm.
what makes us so human, and the
Mhm.
ability to either convey a story like your journaling does,
Mhm.
or a huge load of scientific fact like
Mhm.
what I'm doing.
Mhm.
Well, and there's all kinds of in between. So I just, whatever you pick though, my but this is to do with me and my nature. I say take it to the extreme. Try to be the best you can be. My motto to myself is it's absolutely not worth doing unless I can be the best in the world.
Mhm.
Now, that's a little extreme, but you see, that's the kind of drive some people like me need to have to keep at it.
Mhm.
For some people, it's therapy, nothing more. It's
Mhm.
therapeutic. And I understand that.
Mhm.
And for some people who are kind of insane, well, I'm an example of what you can do with very little talent, but sticking to it and trying damn hard.
Mhm.
That's all.
Wow, that's really cool. I love that perspective. And this has been such a cool conversation. And I would love to get out in the field with you someday and nature journal alongside while you're like catching and measuring fish.
Yeah.
But we'll talk about that for a future expedition.
Okay.
And in the meantime, if people want to, find out more about you, see more of your work, I know you have your Instagram at Fish's Art. Is there anything else like you would want people to check out?
Flickr, is the ultimate platform
Okay.
for having a portfolio
Mm-hmm.
in terms of the layout. Instagram is what I use now every day, but it's
Mm-hmm.
awful in its little square format and
Right.
very low resolution image quality. So if you want to look at things on a good computer, and see the magic of the underwater world in the fish photos that I do, I I still maintain my Flickr site, and Fish as Art also, and then you'll see a combination of my underwater photography and also my illustrations, my scientific
So,
illustrations.
all right, cool. Well, people, I'll put that in the a link to that in the description below, and people can check out more quality images of yours on Flickr and follow you on Instagram for kind of a daily dose. Thank you so much, Paul, for your time. I really appreciate it, and I'm really inspired to go draw some fish right now.
Oh, good, good. Thanks. Take care.
All right, have a good one.